Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the PokerNews Podcast. We are fixing to launch PokerNews Podcast 2.0. This is our dry run. We're just testing things out for you guys. For those who are listening or watching, you are in for a treat. We're going to have a whole new audio setup, a bunch of new video options, and we are looking to start shooting the podcast live so that we can integrate our audience more fully and completely when and where possible. I am your host, Auntie Chardonnay, Sarah Herring. I'm joined by Chad Holloway. Chad, you had the Rona. Now we don't even know what you have. You're feeling sick, but you're still in for the PokerNews Podcast.
I did not want to miss this launch of 2.0, but yeah, definitely have some sort of bug. It's not been fun, especially coming on the heels a couple weeks, 3 weeks after Corona. But it is what it is. I'm excited to be here. This is, it's not my background that you're used to seeing. If you're watching this, it's not my comic room emporium, but we're getting a little more professional around here, which is pretty exciting.
Things are getting fancy, and you guys can see Chad's got one of our sponsors for the week loaded up behind him, Unibet. We've got a couple sponsors coming into 2022. We'll bring you guys some more stuff about them, but we want to give a quick shout out. And let's talk a little bit, you guys. We have got a pretty serious show. Now, usually we shoot earlier in the week, but this week there was some big stuff going down on Wednesday, so we decided to push the show just a little bit later so we could talk a little bit of this Phil Hellmuth and Tom Dwan high stakes poker match. This was highly anticipated, I would say, and, I think Chad and I are both going to be kind of stoked on this. Chad, didn't we call this a little last week?
We do like our Phil Hellmuth, I think, on the PokerNews Podcast, and his record on the show speaks for itself. So he went 7-0 to start, if you remember. He beat Antonio Esfandiari when the show first started, then swept Daniel Negreanu, so 3-0, 3-0, that's 6-0. Then he beat Nick Wright in round one of the High Stakes Duel 3, which is happening now. Nick Wright, of course, a famous sports commentator who did not opt to the rematch. And so the way it works with High Stakes Duel is you have to win 3 in a row before you can cash out. So Hellmuth couldn't cash out unless he didn't receive a new challenger. Tom Dwan stepped up, put up $100K, and played the poker bet and beat him. This was back in August of last year. He won that match, so Phil Hellmuth went 7-1. But Hellmuth issued his right for a rematch, and that's what we saw play out on Wednesday, January 26th. It was for $200,000 apiece for a $400,000 prize pool. It was another fun, entertaining watch. This one relatively short compared to some of the ones in the past. I think it was around 3.5 hours. There was a lot of just small back and forth for a while, and then Phil Hellmuth pulled out to a lead, won a couple big pots, and eventually sealed the deal against Tom Dwan in a pretty impressive fashion to go to 8-1 in his high stakes duel record, win the $400,000 prize. But it's not over yet. Like I said, you have to win 3 in a row or not have a challenger. And so right now it was Tom's Dwan option to issue a rematch if he didn't. He had 72 hours to decide, or he does have 72 hours to decide. If he doesn't, somebody else could step in if they're willing to put in the buy-in. But Tom Dwan did tell Poker News after the match that he does want to extend the rematch option, and so they're going to be playing again. We don't know when. Maury Eskandani, who runs the production side of things, said he thinks it will likely be sometime in late March or April, but a specific date is yet to be determined. But there will definitely be another match between these two competitors.
I mean, of course, everyone knows Tom Dwan is going to fire again. There's no way Tom Dwan is like, oh, okay, cool. I'll just save the money then. I better just reel it in. And I think that's part of what, makes him a fun and exciting player to watch anyways. And there's always been this conversation, and there continues to be this conversation about Phil Hellmuth and, his credibility, his skills. Is he mostly only good against bad opponents? We've had all these debates and conversations, and it just seems like he keeps showcasing he's it, dude. He's the boss. And maybe it's this, people want to say oh, it's this format. It's there's a lot of specific things to the nature of this format, but it's also but what about the formats where he wins 1Ks at WSOP events? Or I don't it doesn't seem to be a format thing to me. But hats off to Phil Hellmuth, and of course all of us are entertained and appreciate the opportunity to be entertained by these players. And one of the most interesting stories to come out of the week, and something that I think a lot of people were buzzing about and talking about in the poker world, there's been speculation leading up to this, but Bally's is going to be changing its name to Horseshoe just in time for the WSOP. And Chad, my thought in this situation is kind of, there's a lot of things to get worked out before we get the WSOP set up. Like, do we need any extra changes?
Look, this has been in the cards for a long time now. We knew about it, some of us at Poker News, back during the WSOP last year. There were rumblings that this was going to happen. It just took Caesars Entertainment a long time to get this, official, I guess, because the press release hit earlier this week. So it is happening. They're going to start some renovations this spring. It's going to be a complete rebranding. The Bally's, as we know it now, will remain open. They'll still have their hotel, their gaming. So they're just going to make this transition as they go. For one, I love it. I fancy myself a bit of a poker historian. The World Series of Poker started at Binion's Horseshoe in downtown Las Vegas. It went to the Rio in 2005, and it's been there ever since until coming to this year. So it's exciting for the WSOP to be going somewhere new and for that place to be a new Horseshoe. Now, the Horseshoe brand has been around, not in Vegas per se, but if you recall when the Binion family had a split, Becky Binion got to keep the Las Vegas property before she ultimately lost it. And then Jack Binion went out and he took the Horseshoe brand and took it around the country. So opened one, I think, in Tunica, Mississippi, and in maybe Biloxi. I've been to Horseshoe Hammond, which is essentially a Chicagoland area. There's Horseshoe Council Bluffs outside Omaha. So the Horseshoe brand was expanded around the country and now is coming to the Las Vegas Strip. And really, like the 50-yard line of the Las Vegas Strip, that location, Bally's right there, really splits the Strip in half. And so I'm really excited to see it. It's tying the old poker history, not only poker history, old history of Vegas with the Binion's Horseshoe and that legacy with this new chapter for Caesars, for the World Series of Poker. And I hope, fingers crossed, that the WSOP will really take advantage of this, because I think there's a lot of great marketing opportunities, a lot of opportunities to maybe delve into the history, maybe have some sort of exhibit. So people who are visiting the World Series of Poker this summer can, connect with that history from the Horseshoe. And this one to me is a win-win all around. I'm really excited about it. And I'm going to add a new poker chip to my collection, Sarah, because they're going to come out with a new Horseshoe poker chip, and you better believe I'm going to buy a whole set.
I'm with you. I love the history. I actually just love in fact, for my wedding, when I gave necklaces to my bridesmaids, I gave them all a little golden horseshoe. I like I'm somebody who's a bit of I think a little bit about luck. I believe on luck. I'm a little bit superstitious. I think most poker players are. So I just love the vibe of the horseshoe. And yeah, I'm with you in terms of it sort of honoring and being an homage to where this all started, where it all began. And, as we look into where we are now, one of the things this week that had my jaw on the floor was the WPT Lucky Heart Poker Open. First place prize was almost $1 million. We've talked about what's going on in Florida before on this show. We talked about, how Florida for sure showed up, during this sort of early openings post-COVID. And it seems like there's no stopping. It is gangbusters.
Yeah, the whole Lucky Hearts Poker Open was this long series. It started back on January 13th, recently finished yesterday, which was the 26th. So ran for almost 2 full weeks. There were 33 different numbered events, catered to over 15,000 combined entrants, and awarded more than $16.3 million. We'll talk about some of the side event winners in a minute here. You were talking about the Lucky Hearts Poker Open WPT, which was a $3,500 buy-in, ended up being the second largest WPT in history with 1,982 entrants. So it was just absolutely massive. And yeah, it was another exciting one. The final table played out yesterday. Alex Yen out of Indiana began as the chip leader and pretty much went wire to wire. I think he lost it very briefly in heads-up play against Anton Wig, a very well-known and accomplished poker pro. But Alex Yen battled back, ultimately got it done, and took it down for $975,000, which prior to this win, he had about $400,000 in live tournament earnings in his career, according to the Hendon Mob. So now he just blasts that out of the water. It's his first win. I kind of got the monkey off his back after finishing runner-up in several tournaments. So big congratulations to him. And then also just a real quick shout-out to Jake Ferraro, who finished as the WPT Player of the Year last season. And he comes to this event and ends up going deep in this massive field and finishes in 9th place. So off to another good start for him, kind of picking up where he left off.
Well, you mentioned that there was quite a few other events that, attracted some big names that we might all know and might recognize in some of the side events. You want to cover a couple of those?
Yeah, it was exciting because this whole series was bookended by Farid, which he's another big name poker pro. So it kicked off with this deep stack tournament, event number 1, got almost 5,000 runners, $2.6 million in the prize pool, and Farid took it down for $306,000. Fast forward then to the end, the last event of the tournament was event number 33. It was a $2,200 buy-in deep stack PLO tournament, 107 runners, and Jattin also took that one down for an additional $58,000. So I think that's a pretty cool storyline that he shows up, kicks it off, and ends up ending it with a victory as well. Scott Baumstein, who's always killing it down at the Seminole Hard Rock, captured 2 titles, an $1,100 deep stack for $60,000, and then another $1,100 deep stack about a week later for $97,000. And another guy who was always capturing titles there added 2 more Seminole Hard Rock trophies in Yuval Bronshtein. He took down event number 9, $400 Omaha and Stud High-Low tournament for $8,000. And then towards the end, took down event number 32, was a $600 horse for another $12,000. And then there was a high roller tournament that we should really mention. It was $25,000 buy-in, and it was a great turnout, 93 entries. That created a $2.3 million prize pool. And the dolphin trainer himself, Jonathan Jaffe, not a real dolphin trainer. If you remember, he trolled ESPN WSOP coverage many years ago by saying he was a dolphin trainer. But he ended up winning that for $575,000, and he did so by defending his title because he won that same event last year. So another solid turnout down there at the Seminole Hard Rock. And, we just talked about the Horseshoe coming to Vegas. Don't forget, the Mirage was sold to the same people who run these Seminole events down in South Florida. And it's going to take a few years for them to get their Seminole Hard Rock brand there in Vegas. But when they do, man, I like the prospect of possibly having tournament series like this running there alongside the Venetian, alongside Wynn, alongside World Series of Poker. Vegas is and always will be the poker capital of the world. But, man, if you can add some of this Seminole Hard Rock flavor to their offerings, I think that's really gonna take it to a whole new level.
Yeah, I have to agree. It's, hopeful for the poker industry as a whole and for especially poker rooms in Vegas, which it seemed were just dying out there for ages, to potentially bring in some new blood. And seeing what's going on in Florida, to me, showcases just the appetite for poker in general, and the desire is there. So, if you build it, they will come. I hope that's ultimately what we're looking at. We want to quickly give another shout out to our sponsor, which is in the form of Natural 8. We appreciate them sponsoring our show. And let's talk a little bit about some of the circuit winners, Chad. I thought this was kind of, a little funny and maybe a little bit sad, but Victor Paredes won his first ring at the WSOP Thunder Valley. But of course, the title and mostly all of the buzz was about the 4th place finisher, Jerry Yang.
Yeah, Jerry Yang, the winner of the 2007 World Series of Poker main event, going deep in this one, 587 entries in the $1,700 main event. And, Jerry Yang, I guess, was largely considered one of those guys who was a one-hit wonder, hasn't done anything too noteworthy since that big victory. He still plays and is around. He runs his restaurants. Really nice guy. I love Jerry. I've interviewed him many times. But from a playing perspective, we hadn't seen him do too much. So when he made this final table, not only made it, he was the chip leader at the start of the final table. There was certainly some buzz, but ultimately could only work it into a 4th place finish, but still a nice score of $58,000. And then, as you said, it was one Victor Paredes out of Modesto, California. He actually finished runner-up in a World Series of Poker event last year. So he comes here, gets the job done, gets the ring, gets a $170,000 first place prize. And it was another good stop at Thunder Valley. What Seminole does down in South Florida, you go to the opposite end of the country, up there in Northern California in the Sacramento area. Thunder Valley is where it's at. Some other ring winners there. Bill Stevenson kicked things off in a seniors event. We had Jason Meyer winning the horse event. Christy Wynn took down event number 7, which is a no-limit hold'em knockout tournament. That one was pretty exciting because 2 females got heads up in an opening event on the circuit. You don't really just see that too often, and they battled for like 2.5 hours. So that was a pretty cool storyline. And then, of course, Scott Stewart, well-known poker pro, he topped a field of 69 runners to take down the high roller event for $65,000. And another solid stop there. And then, of course, there on the other end of the country the other end of the world, rather. The WSOP circuit was in Rozvadov at King's Casino for a international circuit stop. They had a 1,700 euro buy-in tournament, got 808 entries, and that one was ultimately won by Turkey's Feyzullah Karaarslan, and he won, 204,000 euros for that victory, got the ring, and then also the top 12 finishers in that tournament got a seat into the 2022 World Series of Poker Europe main event. So they got that to look forward to. And just a shout out real quick to my fellow Global Poker Award nominee for Live Reporter of the Year, Christian Zetsky, was over there handling live reporting duties himself and did an excellent job as always. So shout out to him. And I'm looking forward to those Global Poker Awards there. We were talking a little bit about it off the air. I'll get to see you in Vegas here in about 3 weeks.
I know, I'm very excited. And of course, I've been on a couple other shows discussing, thoughts on the awards, opinions and all that. I do think we probably need to do that at some point on our show before we get there. But I guess since you've been nominated, there's certain categories we're just going to have to obviously avoid. But this is something kind of interesting because, everybody has their own thoughts on, sort of, we talked about it in terms of the horseshoe, but it's difficult for me to stomach the concept of a circuit event being in like Eastern Europe or like in Europe. For me, somehow it's like the circuit events stay here and maybe we could rebrand in some slightly different way because it feels very different somehow. I don't know how to explain it to me, but I would rather it be termed slightly different or viewed slightly different somehow. Does that make sense?
It does. I think the WSOP circuit is going to be in for some changes in the future. But right now, it's kind of like, let's just get it back up and going because of COVID and how that was all ruined. And the WSOP, is operating kind of on a skeleton's crew, lost a lot of stops that still haven't recovered, haven't reopened their rooms from COVID. And so I think that this year, it's like, let's just get through it. Let's get the WSOP up and running at the Horseshoe in Las Vegas, back in its normal summertime slot. And then we look forward to the next season, the 2022-2023 WSOP circuit season. I think we're going to find something that's a little more cohesive, if you will. Now, that still probably is going to include international stops. But there, to me, definitely has always been a different feeling between the international stops and the stops here in the United States. And I think that's primarily because here in the U.S., you see, or at least you used to see, a lot of the same grinders traveling from stop to stop. So there was this sense of consistency and expectation, whereas you don't see that in the international stops. Each international stop at the WSOP circuit is very regional. You don't really see those players traveling. So I think that's kind of that disconnect you're referencing.
Yeah, certainly. There's definitely a sort of community of traveling circuit grinders. I mean, we even say it like that, right? Circuit grinders. So it's interesting, but you're right. It's like, okay, let's not put the cart before the horse. Let's get this thing moving again. And I'm sure I'm not the only one who's thought about that. The WSOP has plenty of marketing people whose job it is to make those kind of decisions. We talked a little bit last week also, Chad, about the Stairway to Millions, what a success it's really been so far. I think, putting events even in the Poker Go studio tends to attract the guys who are playing there quite frequently and a lot. And actually that makes me want to ask you another question, but we'll save that sort of till later in the show. Last to Millions events, Nick is just such a sicko. He I think has made a really organic movement throughout his poker career and into the spot where he is now, and it's a spot that he undoubtedly deserves.
Yeah, he came in, won event number 6 tournament, 21 entries, took it down for 567,000, and then of course got an entry into the finale, which was a $102,000 buy-in. Was event number 8. He had got 19 runners, and he ended up winning that one for just over $1 million. So almost $1.6 million between the two series, or two events in back-to-back days. So a nice start to 2022 for Nick Petrangelo, who I do believe said he's hoping to play a little bit more this year. And he's always been a beast since the days I remember first learning of him on the EPT, I think it was when I first saw him, and did some stuff with some chip leader coaching at one point, and is just a crusher. I think can't remember. He just knows his shit. Let's just put it that way. Nick Petrangelo is a crusher. And as for this Stairway to Millions by Poker Go, I thought it was decent. I enjoyed having an event every day to keep an eye on. Chance Kornuth winning 2 of the early ones. I think it was. I wouldn't say it was like a grand slam, but I think for trying something new for the first time out, that the Poker Go folks did decent, and I hope to see this return, next year. I think it was a nice little way to slot in a new series that gives really amateurs a chance to play at Poker Go Studio, right? So the first event was only an $1,100 buy-in tournament, so I could have went there, played there, competed against some people, and got that feeling of what it's like to play at Poker Go Studios, and in a dream scenario, work my way up to that 100K buy-in, and I think that's obviously a storyline they would hope for too, but we'll have to wait to see if that happens next year, because it certainly didn't this year.
So it's interesting. One of the questions I was on the Orbit a few days ago, and Matt Berkey was one of the guests also. And one of the things that he brought up, we were talking about, what is missing in terms of acknowledging poker players, or what's, what sort of categories maybe should exist that don't. And one of the things that he brought up was that he would think that within a certain number of years, probably the only poker players that anyone will know or care about will be this like small group of people that just continually go around this high roller circuit, that like high roller tournament poker players are essentially the only ones really being acknowledged or applauded. And I thought that was an interesting point, because obviously from the media, that's primarily whom I'm seeing and interviewing and interacting with. And I don't know even really what the appropriate way would be to circumvent this, but I'm curious what your thoughts are, Chad, on that kind of perspective.
I definitely think it's an issue, and it's something that we should, as a whole, address. Now, it's not easy to address something of that magnitude just on a whim, if you will. Like, this is something that I feel like would be great to, during the WSOP, all kinds of different media outlets, and those of us who do actively promote the game have some sort of, symposium where we get together, like the Tournament Directors Association does every other year, where we get together and we talk about the best practices, things that we can agree upon, some things that should become standard through the industry. And as part of that, you can talk and discuss about, okay, how can we start promoting new players, new characters? Because to me, that really was a big part of the poker boom, was people getting exposed to the characters of the game, right? The Mike the Mouth Matisows, the Daniel Negreanu's, the Phil Hellmuth, and Sammy Farha, and a lot of these guys that just Devilfish Elliott for me, the late great Devilfish Elliott, really fell in love with just his aura, and we don't see that as much as we did back then, and so I think it's on us to find a way to report it. But I also do think that some of the players have to be willing to do their part or step up to the plate if they want, right? So that shouldn't be a requirement nor an expectation. But, if they want to sit there and act like a robot with little to no emotion, they don't want to do interviews, they don't want to do, any press, they don't want to do any branding of themselves, then maybe we don't spotlight them as much. We don't, give them that spotlight. Instead, give it to somebody who can help us in the quest to grow the game and give them the opportunity to introduce themselves to players. I kind of did that with our guest last episode, Mike Holtz, BrockLesnar, the WSOP.com Player of the Year from 2021. He's a pretty fun guy. He's got a cool story. He's got a personality. He's a character. And I like that, especially coming from behind an online screen. And, Mike Bailey, the documentary that I alluded to, is now out. You can check that out on YouTube for free. It's about 25 minutes. It's called For Love of Money, is the YouTube channel that you can check it out on. I highly recommend it. I enjoyed it, but I always try to do my best to introduce new people, but look, it's hard. Like Matt Berkey has a point, and even like look at a guy like Landon Tice. Landon Tice is a guy who I feel probably has had the biggest push for an absolute newcomer, right? From the wide spectrum of poker media. Has he broken through to the mainstream? Does the wider poker audience know? Do our listeners all know who Landon Tice is? I don't know.
Yeah, that's true. And I actually made almost all the same points you did. We certainly should be having a yearly conference. We all are in Vegas anyways. Why don't we get together as an industry and sort of discuss all of the many issues facing us, from media, players, tournament directors, like all of these people. And actually I said the exact same thing, especially in terms of streamers, right? We have these like Garrett Adelsteins or these players who are making a point to be characters and maybe do things that they may or may not always be plus EV for them in the long run, but they are working hard to keep these streams running and to keep these streams entertaining, and that those people also need to be acknowledged probably in some way for what they're doing for the game.
And Sarah, real quick to just harp on that, I think a big part of that too is poker on TV, right? So aside from Poker Go, there's not a lot of poker on TV. WSOP is on the CBS Sports now. But I remember back in the day, there used to be a lot more intimate vintages of players, right? So I remember rewatching one recently where they went to Jennifer Harmon's house and introduced you to her husband, Marco Traniello, at the time, and her two young kids who are now grown up, as I see on social media, which is just crazy. But, giving these behind-the-scenes looks at some of the players that we want to build up, instead of just pulling them into a room, sitting them down in front of a green screen or step and repeat and interviewing them like that, I feel like we have to start going a little bit more of the extra mile, spending time with these people, getting to know their lives, and letting poker fans know that they're more than just, computing machines, the GTO robots. And, like a guy like Nick Petrangelo. I love Nick Petrangelo. I've had the opportunity to interact with him, but at the table, he's not boisterous. He's not out there. So if somebody's just watching him, Nick Petrangelo might be kind of bland. Let's find a way to bridge that gap and appreciate the high level of poker, but also the person underneath it. Again, a guy like Nick Petrangelo or somebody else to do that. And I know of high stakes poker players who would be unwilling to do that, but all we can do is our part and welcome them into the fray. But as an industry, we could probably do a better job of coming to terms about, all right, what's the best way to go about this? And maybe we will someday. I do feel like the industry as a whole is starting to come a little bit closer together, especially as we rebound from COVID. And that's twofold. A lot of places went out of business. A lot of companies went out of business. A lot of people lost their jobs. So the industry got a little bit smaller. But I also feel that there's this sense of community rebuild. Okay, how do we bounce back from this even better than before?
Yeah, and Berkey did make a whole other point on that, which I thought was interesting, but we'll save that for next week, kind of this industry coming together and what it looks like in a zero-sum game where the ultimate end is always to find an edge. How do we keep people coming and not just totally deplete the resources? And I think that's an interesting conversation we definitely need to have. But we'll save that for next week. And for this week, we want to talk about former PokerStars. I don't even know. They had so many different options, I think, at one time for how they brought people on. You were like a friend of PokerStars, an ambassador of PokerStars, a team sports star, an online star. And Louie Anderson was a famed comedian. I think probably most people will remember. I certainly do, who recently passed away. He was a poker lover. He was somebody who represented PokerStars and represented the game of poker out there in the world. And it's definitely a sad loss, I think, for us as a community, as always.
I think most people knew Louie Anderson from his days hosting The Family Feud, the well-known game show. I particularly remember him growing up as a kid in the 90s. He had a Saturday morning cartoon based on his own life called Life with Louie. I watched that. And then more recently, he actually won an Emmy for Outstanding Supporting Actor in a Comedy Series in 2016 for his role in the FX series Baskets. So he was fairly well known. He's been performing stand-up, I think, since the early 80s. First appeared on Johnny Carson in 1984. And his passing was very sad. It was on the same day that, rock and roll legend Meatloaf passed away. And for Louie Anderson, who was living in Vegas, his passing came after a battle with cancer. He was 68. It was sad. And, I didn't even know he had this connection to poker history until I had a brief conversation with Nolan Dalla, who, former director of the WSOP, worked for PokerStars and really is, the poker historian, in my opinion. And he said, did you know that he represented PokerStars in 2006 at the World Series of Poker main event? I think the site put him in, Norm Macdonald in, and, they used to, like you said, they used to put in these different people, friends of, ambassadors, celebrities, what have you. And Louie Anderson was one of them. And I guess the great Dan Goldman was the man behind the scenes who made that happen. And Nolan Dalla wrote a little bit about it, which we shared on Poker News, that, Louie Anderson was a great ambassador. He attended numerous events, signed autographs, told jokes, and just kind of wanted to be a regular guy at the table, and that he was a great ambassador for them. And it was just a small piece of poker history, if you will, one that I think was largely forgotten. And, unfortunately, it was his passing that brought that back to light, but I'm kind of glad that it did, and that we were able to remember Louie Anderson, not only for what he did on TV and in comedy, but for at least a brief time what he did in the poker world.
It's so funny because I can hear his voice in my ears. Not that I even, I wasn't a huge fan of Life with Louie, but I did kind of know it. For whatever reason, he has such this unique and quintessentially different voice that I can hear it. And yeah, it was something I didn't know and also thought was very interesting. And actually, Meatloaf's passing on the same day. Working for Poker News is how I ended up meeting Meatloaf, because he was in this movie with Justin Timberlake, this poker movie.
I was there. I forgot about this.
Yeah.
The Runner.
Yeah. I never even saw the movie, but we interviewed him on the red carpet, and he was so lovely. And so it was a very uncomfortable situation for Poker News, because it was all these like big name, ETV and whatever. And like, we're like at the end of the ropes, like, hello, can anyone talk to us? Like, we're here from Poker News. We'd be like, we're from Poker News, and people would just like keep walking. I was like, this is horrible. But Meatloaf stopped, and he was so warm and fun. And he was just a lovely person. And I, of course, was a huge fan because I'm a huge fan of Fight Club. So yeah, I was anecdotally also. Yeah.
I'm so glad you just brought that up. I totally spaced it. I mean, I remember that I was there for the red carpet. I helped arrange it because I was helping do, some work with them in that promotion of that film. And it was cool to be able to get us on the red carpet, even though, like you said, we were way down at the end or what have you. But, to see Ben Affleck walk by and see Justin Timberlake, because of course they didn't stop and talk with us, but to see them. But we did get, like you said, the B-listers, the local Vegas kind of celebrities, Carrot Top, and I recall
Boys to Men.
Yep. And but I totally spaced that Meatloaf was there, and I'm so happy that you brought that up, because now I remember it. I see it in my head, and I too was a fan of him, his music, and then I also was a fan of Celebrity Apprentice, and he was on that. It might have been the same season as Annie Duke. I'd have to go back and look, but he was quite the character on that, and it was very sad to have his passing, Louie Anderson's, and there's just been a lot of celebrity deaths already here in 2022. I guess Betty White was she 2021? I think she was 2021, or just coming into 2022. Anyways, too many good ones going too soon. One in the poker world, in fact, that I just had to write about last night. The article will be up on Poker News later today. Is Paul Strohm, not the biggest name in poker, but he was a big deal on the mid-major scene, especially on the Run Good Poker series. He was essentially like a family member for them. He had a private battle with cancer and ultimately passed away here 1 week ago. And he was a great guy. I played with him. I was on the Run Good Poker cruise with him. I had many interactions over the years, and his passing is certainly felt by myself and others in the Run Good family, like Tana Karn and Haley Hochstetler. So hopefully Paul Strohm knows that he made such a big impression on so many people in the poker world, and is resting in peace.
I just got to tell you something, Chad, as we get into Poker News Podcast 2.0, one thing I'm going to miss is your dogs jumping up on the bed behind you. I'm kind of lamenting
already. Did you hear
already.
him, though?
I heard them.
Did you just hear him?
Yeah. They're like, Dad, what are you doing?
He came down the basement stairs because the setup now is in the basement for me. So the good news is he's the young one. He's only 2, so he's very spry, and he'll probably come up and down. The other one is middle-aged. She does sometimes, but she's a little chunky, so she doesn't like the stairs too much. And then the other one's like 12, and she does occasionally. Well, she does occasionally, but I always chastise her because she's too old to be doing that shit.
Yeah, that's right. Just take it easy in your old age, girl. Take it easy. Well, I'm going to miss them. Let's talk a little bit about what we've got in store for the audience this week coming up. Poker News Podcast 2.0, this week we decided to just do Sans a guest so we could kind of put some of the things, implement some of the things without too much extra. But Chad, I know you've got an awesome guest in store for us next week.
I've got 2 guests I can share with you because I literally got an email off screen here about 10 minutes ago confirming. So next week, I'm going to actually talk to him tomorrow, get it in the can, and then we'll feature it next week. One, Jesse Lonis. He is one of the hottest players on the poker circuit right now. He's just been crushing it. He is always going deep. He was, I think, the day 1 chip leader in the Lucky Hearts Poker Open that we talked about earlier in the episode. He ultimately didn't cash, but just always putting his name out there, and kind of like we were talking about, how do we profile these guys? How do we make these guys the new characters? Because he's put in his dues. He's had the results. It's time to give him the spotlight as well. So I'm excited to do that on the Poker News Podcast. And then I also recently finished reading a poker book called The $1 Billion Poker Heist, or The $1 Billion Hollywood Heist, I think it was, by Houston Curtis. And it's basically a counter narrative to Molly's Game. You know, the big book about the big Molly's Game, Hollywood game with Tobey Maguire and others who, they did a movie about it with Jessica Chastain and Idris Elba. Houston Curtis was in that game, and his book is more of a tell-all, if you will, more like a, I don't know, National Enquirer-esque type. He wasn't afraid to name names and share details that Molly Bloom might have not in her book. And so I love the book. I enjoyed it. I reached out to him asking if he'd come on the podcast, and like I said, I just got an email. Is interested. He's also doing a project with Live at the Bike that he's going to come on and tell us a little bit about. So that one will probably be in a couple weeks, but I'm excited definitely to talk to Jesse Lonis and Houston Curtis, and I think they've got some good shows coming up.
Dude, that sounds super exciting, and I just actually finished the book last night that I've been reading. I've got a couple of more in there that I'm waiting to kill off, but that sounds like something I could get behind and would be definitely interested in. And finally, as we wrap out the show, we just want to talk a little bit about Best Bet Jacksonville. The Winter Open is going to be kicking off today. That will actually probably be yesterday for those who are watching this on the YouTube or who are listening to it on one of our listening platforms. But Poker News is going to be there for the season opener and also for the 2K main event. So you definitely do not want to miss that. Be sure to get on pokernews.com for that. And of course, for all the other action, you guys, we are putting our blood, sweat, and tears into this content here. All of the latest news, the gossip, the whatever's going on in the poker world, we are doing our best to stay on top of it for you guys. So please don't forget to check out pokernews.com. Also, if you can, please don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. If you can click the little bell, you can get notified of our videos. We are really trying to do everything we can in 2022 to hit this out of the park. And if you guys have content ideas for us, please leave them in the description. Just let us know what we can and should be doing in 2022. And if you want to get with Chad, he's Chad A. Holloway on Twitter. I am Aunty, A-U-N-T-Y Chardonnay on Twitter. You can let us know who you think we should be interviewing or what stories we're missing. I do appreciate my boy John Hart reached out to me in the DMs to share some of the stuff going down in Dallas in the card rooms, and we are currently working on some stuff looking into what's happening in Texas as a whole. So thank you, John, and I did not miss it. I got you, boy. And yeah, if you're the person in Dallas who stole my husband's Instagram, I will come for you. Thank you guys for watching. Deuces. If you did enjoy this video and would like to see more of this type of content, please consider subscribing. For the best poker updates, strategy, and analysis, visit PokerNews.com.